Welcome to AI Role Models, a podcast from One Strategy Studio that goes beyond the hype to explore how real leaders are transforming their businesses with artificial intelligence. In each episode, I'll sit down with pioneers from the world's leading brands who are reimagining marketing, insights, and innovation with AI. But we're not here to talk about theoretical possibilities. These are candid conversations about the real challenges, unexpected victories, and practical lessons learned from implementing AI in organizations. Here's today's episode. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here for another episode of AI Role Models. My guest today is none other than Nick Graham. Nick was previously the managing director of Clear USA, spent 8 years as VP of Insights and Analytics at PepsiCo, and then spent 3.5 years as SVP and Global Head of Insights and Analytics at Mondelez. Nick has recently founded a new company called Vertimus, who is helping organizations drive effective, lasting change through a unique blend of AI, human empathy, behavioral science, and powerful storytelling. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to see you again, Dave. Hope you're doing well.
Indeed, yeah. Always good to catch up. Nick, I understand it's been a while since we last talked. You've changed country. We were talking about just before the show.
Yeah, I've pretty much changed everything. You know, they say when you make a change, you only do like one thing at a time. So
Yep.
I changed my job, I changed my country, we're building a house as well. So basically everything changed. I just kept my husband and my dog for company, but everything else has changed around me in the last year.
Fantastic. Well, Nick, needless to say, there's a lot going on in the space. I've seen you here, there, and everywhere talking about kind of AI and its impact on our industry. So really exciting to kind of get stuck in today and kind of dig in with you. An exceptional career and journey that we just highlighted. Obviously, kind of moving through from Clear to PepsiCo onto Mondelez through to founding Vertimus now. I guess what are some of the key lessons and principles about insights and analytics that have carried through these transitions and kind of stood the test of time? And then we'll dig in a little bit more to what's changing.
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally, what I would say is, during the last, whatever it's been, 15, 20 years that I've worked in this industry, I'd say the thing that's constant, or a couple of things that are constant. One is that fundamentally it's about understanding and shaping consumer and shopper behavior, right? That's kind of why we got into this job in the first place.
Sure.
Fundamentally, that's what gets me up in the morning, is really understanding what is it that drives behavior today, and what do you need to do to influence and shape that in whatever direction that you need to do in future. I think the other big thing that has always been there, but I think is becoming even more prominent, and we'll talk about this, I guess, as we talk about the role of AI as well, and automation and digitization writ large, is just the need for insights, particularly inside corporate multinationals, to think about their role as bringing that insight into the business to help ultimately drive a business decision, right? To drive better business decisions about where we focus, how we innovate, how we create creative advertising ideas, whatever it might be, but ultimately about driving a better business decision to ultimately influence our consumer or shopper to act in the way that we ideally want them to act. So I think those are the fundamentals, right? So it's about the heart of it is always about consumer and shopper behavior, and it's about helping drive the business to make better, more consumer shopper centric, more forward-looking decisions, as opposed to just thinking about what's right for the bottom line, basically.
No, that makes a ton of sense. So your latest venture, Vertimus, focuses on effective, lasting change. What, having moved from a couple of really large CPG companies to a founder role and a new startup, and as you said, a lot of change. What was the kind of gap you saw in the market that kind of led you to start this new venture?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a combination of things. I think, obviously I've done a number of insights leadership roles over the last decade or so. And I think as part of that, what I've seen is a couple of things. One is the need for insights, I think, is bigger than ever. You know, the volatility, the challenge that most businesses face in terms of identifying how to grow, I think, and the huge sort of data proliferation that they're facing means that need for really good insights analytics teams is stronger than ever. However, what was really sobering to me is, different studies that say this. 70 to 80% of what insights and analytics teams are doing never drives a business decision. So a huge amount, and I know having led teams, the huge amount of hard work and effort and long hours that go in from the team is not translating to the business impact that we want. And that's bad for the insights teams, but it's also bad for the business because they're not getting the most out of their insights leaders. And so, through that experience, and I think through having been on the receiving end, if you like, of lots of organizational change, corporate life is now just a series of reorgs, is
For sure.
I guess I realized how misunderstood the insights team is. Often we'll have, big consulting companies come in. They don't really understand what insights teams do or the value that they can bring. They just see productivity and efficiency. And I think even when they do, they just tend to think very much in terms of tools, processes, and don't really think about the talent you need, the skills you need, what's the behavioral change that you're going to drive in that insights team to get the results. So I think it really came from a passionate belief that insights can and should have a bigger stage in business decision making, but that it's going to need to change, and we need to think a bit more holistically about how we drive that change, which is why I talk about being this sort of like more lasting and more effective change in organizations.
That makes a ton of sense. I mean, how do you feel in terms of kind of shaping that and moving the needle from that 78 to 80% of kind of insights not being used, in terms of building those insights teams of the future? How are those
Hmm.
skills evolving, and what does the insights professional kind of need to be working on in this day and age of, so much change so fast?
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I think there's a couple of things in that. One is, and I guess we'll talk a lot about this today, is embracing technology and digitization in
Yep.
its broadest sense, particularly AI, right? But not just AI and not just Gen AI, but all forms of artificial intelligence. The reality is that most insights teams are not getting much bigger. In fact, in many cases, they're under headcount pressure. So first of all, we need to be smart about thinking about how we use our time most effectively. And the reality I know is, 40, 50% of most insights teams' time is taken up with lower value add work. And I don't mean that to diminish it, because I know it's really important work, but it's hard graft work, and it takes up huge amounts of time and energy, collecting data, cleaning data, putting it into dashboards, like digging through reports to find insights, just finding information in the first place. So this huge amount of human capital
Yep.
is somewhat wasted today because it's being stuck in very sort of manual day-to-day work, which again isn't great for businesses, but isn't great for the teams because it's not the most rewarding work, and it's not where we need their insight superpowers. So I think a big part of it is how we free up more capacity within our insights teams. But then if we're going to free up that capacity, the other piece is where do we redirect that time and that energy? And if you think about the sort of the journey or the journey of insights, we spend a lot of our time today in the middle of the curve, right? In the doing of the research and the doing
For
of the
sure. Yeah.
analysis, pulling it all together and creating the report and creating the opportunity spaces or whatever it might be. But where we need to be spending more time, I think, in future, if we can free up that time in the middle, is on the either end of the bell curve, if you like, which
Yep.
is the brief, like what's the real business problem, and is this thing that I'm about to do, is this really going to solve this business problem, or is there another way that we should be solving for this? I mean, can we just even use existing information that we have? And then the other part of it, if you're on the other end of the bell curve, how do we land this into action in the organization? So from going from being spending the vast majority of our time in the middle of that bell curve and being sort of proud of being experts, research
Yep.
analytics practitioners. I think we need to rethink about ourselves. If we can free up some of that time and capacity, thinking of ourselves much more as insights-led business decision makers, which means spending much more time on the front and the end and on really understanding how to drive better, more insightful business decisions. So I think the shift is from us being researchers and analysts to and being sort of the mechanics of the team to
Yep.
being right there at the decision making table. And that requires not only that capacity, but it requires a different set of capabilities, right? A different set of leadership skills. It requires us to sort of think and act like business leaders, not like insights people, if you like.
I think that's a great point, and I think a lot of the founding principles for One Strategy have come out of that same insight of, how do we free up more time for our human
Mm-hmm.
capital? How does AI enable people to spend more time on that strategic, critical thinking, adding value to the business, rather than, as you say, kind of bogged down in the work and the doing of the middle of that bell curve. So yeah, absolutely fascinating. So Nick, obviously, the way everyone talks about AI, you'd think it's only been around for 12, 18 months. And obviously
Right.
ChatGPT's kind of release was, back in November 2023 was like, I guess, a big kind of breakthrough where AI became mainstream. Everybody was talking about it. You can't scroll a LinkedIn post without seeing AI mentioned 974 times every day.
Right.
But thinking back to kind of the evolution of AI, and I'm sure you were kind of experimenting with this kind of early
Yeah.
in your time at Mondelez, and obviously it's been a lot more applied to data and analytics previously, and now we're seeing it kind of move into more creativity and strategy work. But would love to hear a little bit about kind of some of the early days of kind of embracing AI during your time at
Yeah.
Mondelez, and what kind of types of challenges you found AI was really great at handling.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, and it's funny you said that because you're 100% right. And it's funny, I have to, had to educate people. Sometimes, some of our team, our like, leadership team, sometimes about, once Gen AI kind of came out and sort of reset the conversation, there's this huge discussion about it that we've been using, not just Mondelez, but as an industry, we've been using AI for decades, right? I mean,
Yep.
this isn't new to us. Traditional machine learning, artificial intelligence, modeling, etc., is not new to us. We've used it for, as say, for generations as at least a generation to optimize pricing, predict trends, spot patterns in particularly big structured or semi-structured data sets. Um, and I would say for I mean, there were lots of uses, and this is one of the things that's funny now, just trying to explain to people, oh no, that is AI, that's AI, that's been using AI this whole time. I would
Yep.
say I think a lot of what we were using it for was kind of crudely put, sort of pattern recognition,
Yep.
trend identification. Um, it was often about, whether it was like performance analytics, business performance analytics, so trying to use it to understand hidden patterns in the data. So what was potentially driving recurrent issues with market share, for example. So essentially being able to give it a huge amount of semi-structured data and actually enabling us to actually to pull out what some of the potential correlations were that were driving that. So just stuff that for a human being would be impossible to do in any sort of efficient way. So,
Yep.
I mean, again, we've been using that across data analytics, performance measurement, marketing mix modeling for, I say, like 10, 20 years. I think what's different with generative AI is, as you said, sort of it's brought it's sort of different level of intelligence, different level of creativity to AI application. And I think gone beyond what it's enabling us to do, I think is go beyond using it as just a sort of pattern detection tool, but actually something that can therefore, unsurprisingly, like generate ideas, generate insights, generate opportunity areas. So using it truly more as a thought partner to build, as opposed to just something to sort of spot opportunities and patterns in our existing data. So I think it is opening up a huge amount of new opportunity spaces for AI and for the insights team.
Yeah, absolutely. As you've kind of seen more and more solutions kind of come into the market and worked with different insights teams and different kind of insights leaders across a whole bunch of businesses, what are some of the resistances that you've encountered
Hmm.
to leveraging AI, and how did you kind of go about maybe addressing those stakeholder concerns? Because there's definitely people who are all in on AI. There's some people that are AI curious, and then there's some people that maybe haven't, their only interaction with it is maybe using something like ChatGPT. So how do you kind
Yeah.
of bring everyone along on the journey with you?
I think it starts with, and it sounds really obvious, but it starts with understanding what the business problem is, not what the AI solution can deliver. Because I'm working on a couple of projects right now where we're building new AI capabilities, and I think the danger is people get really seduced by the shiny AI thing and
Yeah,
the magic box of AI, and just go, great, we just need it. For what? For what purpose? Like,
yeah,
why do you need it? Like, what's actually the business problem? And then, I know that sounds really obvious, but it's very easy to kind of get seduced by the it can do X, as opposed to really thinking, is that what I need? And I think it's so critical because, first of all, these are not turnkey solutions. Like, they require, if you're going to get good out, you need to put good in, which means you need to train the models, you need to invest the time to make sure you have the right data set in the first place. So you can't just like drop in ChatGPT and think it's going to solve all your problems. Like, again, if
yeah.
you're going to build a solution, you need to really invest in that. So you need to be really sure that this is a business problem that is worthy of that level of investment, and that what you'll get out of it is going to really resolve or solve that problem. So spending the time with business leaders to say, hang on, before we even talk about AI, let's talk about what are the key sort of business problems that we're trying to solve for. Let's work out is is how much of that is a technology solve? How much of that, back to our earlier conversation, is actually a sort of behavior change, talent, skills solution?
Hmm.
And I think too often, just go off on a side note, too often people want, I don't know, I think people want like a technology AI solution because it's sexy, but also because it feels, again, it feels sort of turnkey. I can just drop this in and all my problems will be solved. But in
Yeah,
reality, human beings have still got to use that. Human beings have still got to use the output of that. And, back to why I started my company in the first place, I think neglecting that human part, I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's such a miss because, in fact, again, it's humans who are going to be utilizing it. It's humans who are going to be making decisions off of it. So understanding AI within the sort of system of AI plus people, not
yeah.
only to feed it and to interpret it, but actually to use it and implement it into action in the business. Understanding that whole sort of ecosystem is
Hmm.
really critical if you're going to work out how to solve the problem. So, breaking it down, what I typically do is say, okay, so what are the problems that you're facing, and then let's kind of break them down into where are areas that AI could potentially help you automate, right? So it could help you drive more efficiency and maybe speeding up repetitive tasks like data processing, coding, open-end sentiment analysis, but where it's really about relatively simple tasks, often with relatively structured data, where you can just simplify and automate and streamline things that are taking way too much sort of time and energy from the team today. I think that then there's another set of use cases which is about discovery. So how you can use AI, both traditional AI and Gen AI, to identify patterns, find insights that are sort of hidden in your data sets. So often when businesses have huge amounts of data, but actually the data is not connected together. That's
Yeah.
one of the things that we've been working on with Mondelez on how, with their knowledge management system, they have a huge amount of structured and unstructured data. And actually, a tool like Gen AI can be really powerful to sit on top of that to help you find connections and patterns between that data, particularly written
Yeah.
content, to try and find connections between that data, which again, a regular mere mortal like you and me would take us way too long and probably miss things which
Of course.
AI can spot and see. So you've got automation, you've got discovery, and then I think, excitingly, you've then got creation and simulation. So creation is all about how we can use particularly Gen AI to take the next step from, okay, so I've automated things, I've found interesting things, to how can I actually use generative AI, much like you guys are doing, to start to identify and create opportunity areas, create new product ideas, create positioning directions, but actually to speed up the process from I've got an idea, sorry, I've got an insight, I've got an opportunity space, to actually starting to generate those ideas. So
Mhm.
actually pulling insights much more into the so what, right? So, okay, great, you've got an insight, but now we can actually start to use Gen AI to go to the marketing team, the agency, whoever it might be, the sales team, with some initial ideas, not just an insight, not just an opportunity space. And then the last, but by no means least, we talk about simulation, which is still there are elements of that which are historic, right? So,
Mhm.
some of the sort of simulations we did on testing, right, based on looking at sort of historical patterns in testing data. But then I think a lot of new dig sites there around synthetic data, digital twins, kind of simulated audiences, which still candidly feel they're very much in their infancy. And I think in many of those cases, that's actually often where people get super excited, but then trying to work back to what's the problem they're trying to solve for in some of those. So that's the one I'd say, that last simulate, where it's probably the most exciting, most cutting edge of what AI can do, but it's also the one where I have to really work with the teams to make sure that we're actually putting a proper business problem to solve, a business job to be done behind it.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Um, when you think about kind of the teams that you're working with, the insight leaders, and you talked about kind of the adoption of AI and what they're building internally versus how they're partnering with, lots of vendors in the space are bringing that in. Where do you think it makes sense to build internally, and where do you
Mhm.
think partnering makes more sense?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think particularly right now, there's a lot of push from particularly big corporates to build it internally.
Hmm.
I guess for data protection issues in particular, and also the fact that often the the aha, the opportunity here can come from if you can connect together lots of disparate data sources from different providers, right? So for example, the Mondelez's knowledge estate obviously covers lots of different vendors, lots of different data sets. So if you can create something that can sit on top of all of that, that's
Yep.
obviously more powerful than just on a singular data set. And that with that comes a lot of issues about another third party in the mix in that. So I do think there is a case for it, and I think probably longer term, a lot of, as I say, bigger corporates will push for that because of the control and the competitive advantage they can build around it. In the short term, though, there's a ton of opportunities. Obviously, there's a ton of shorter term pilots that you can be doing in order to really work out, as I say, which of those use cases you want to go after. And then, some cases where it's not about building a long-term system necessarily at this stage, or it's not about a ton of proprietary or multi-partner data that you're putting in. Actually, it's much better, I think, at least to begin with, to buy or sort of co-build, if you like, the solution
Yep.
rather than trying to build it all yourself. So, for example, we've been talking about this with a couple of partners on um, some of the AI testing capabilities. And again, there are great partners out there who can do that already. There are great partners like yourselves that can build opportunity spaces and really help with the strategic thinking part. Now, can agencies build that all in-house? Maybe they could, but in the shorter to medium term, there's much greater, I think, upside from using partners to help you fast track that process. And also even work out, is that something that you should or want to build in-house? Or is
Yep.
actually you want to focus your efforts on something else? Because at the end of the day, all of this it costs time and money, and you need to think about where to prioritize and where to focus. And as you say, which bits to delegate and sort of buy and versus which bits to build yourselves.
For sure. So coming back to kind of shiny objects and all of the hype
Mm.
around that technology, do you have a process or a framework or some way that you've kind of approached kind of evaluating these newer technologies? Obviously, linking it back to the business challenge, starting with that, what's the kind of job to be done, and not putting the tool before the problem. But how are you kind of approaching, kind of evaluating a lot of these new technologies, given that the speed of iteration and progress across the category has been huge over the last 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it kind of comes down to three stages, if you like. The first stage is to determine what, it goes back to what I said. What do you want AI to do? What's the business problem that you're trying to solve for? Because and is AI, first of all, what type of AI is the right solution? So we start with that sort of four-step sort of structure, which is automate, discover, create, and simulate. So you basically look within that to say, like, what problem or problems am I trying to solve for? What could be the right solution? And again, to what extent is AI, even as part of that, to what extent is AI the solution? And what else do I need to think about if I'm going to be able to build this? Because I think it's really important that from the beginning, and this has been, you talked, sorry, before about barriers and challenges. I think beyond sort of skepticism, I think one of the biggest barriers is people are finding that building an AI solution is nowhere near as simple as it seems.
Yeah.
It requires a huge amount. I mean, there's a project I'm working on at the moment, and I think the team are realizing just how much effort is involved in just even collecting and structuring all of the data that needs to be fed in to train the model in the first place, and the amount of energy that needs to go into training the model. So before we start embarking on building a solution, first of all, you need to be really sure, as I said, that it's the right problem, and then we need to think through, if we're going to say, for automation, it's something you want to automate, we need to be really clear. What are the data sources? Are they connected at the moment? So really sort of interrogating the business case first before you start going and building. The second stage is a simple prioritization exercise to understand essentially impact versus feasibility within that. So once we've bottomed out, like, what is it you're trying to solve for? What's the job to be done? What's required to make this happen? Then it's a simple case of trying to work out, or a relatively simple case of trying to work out what's the relative value and feasibility of all of those different use cases so we can prioritize our efforts. And as part of that, one of the things that becomes quite obvious quite quickly is where you have, let's say, high value, low feasibility.
Mhm.
Question in those sometimes becomes, which brings me to my third point, is, do you basically sort of build, buy, co-build slash borrow your solution? So starting to think through at that stage is based on the complexity of what you're building, the value of it, what's the right model for you to adopt in order to be able to move forward? And again, do you move to scale versus pilot? So trying to think through it in that stage of, like, what's the role that you want AI to play, or what job do you want it to do? How do you evaluate how feasible and how big an impact it's going to make? Because that will help you define your priority and your investment strategy. And then last but by no means least, then the how is, and then taking that into account, what's the right way forward in terms of whether you build it internally or with a partner, and where should you be trying to go for scale quickly versus where should you be looking to do, which in many cases probably is the right solution, more of a small scale pilot to kind of really test and learn before you try and scale it kind of more broadly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot of people that are kind of, adding AI into existing systems to, provide enhancements or improvements to speed. But I think one of the things that we've really tried to stay focused on is just the reinvention of that agency model within an
Hmm.
AI world. And I think kind of you're starting to see this being talked about more, this kind of agentic approach, whether it's, agents or, automation. And there's obviously a difference between the two, and how much kind of control and they have over processes. I just think there's some really interesting opportunities coming to not just kind of make what we have better, but to kind of completely rethink,
Reimagine it.
yeah,
Yeah.
reimagine in this world, which is, sometimes can be a scary place, but the breakthroughs and the opportunities that it brings to businesses, and to solve those challenges. And completely agree. I think there's definitely a mix of pulling those things together and building when you've got proprietary data in multiple silo places. Obviously, that's something that
Yeah.
many companies are going to want to keep control of, and then other things where it makes sense because someone's really leaned in and focused on solving a really specific pain point.
Right, right. When it's a really, and that's it, as we sort of go through that process, when you've got a really discrete data set and quite discrete problem to solve or set of problems to solve, actually, in many cases, a small scale pilot with a partner is often the right solution, because actually you shouldn't be going and building a whole internal solution, sort of scaled solution for something like that, and probably isn't the best use of time. But to your point, it's usually more, and that's why you can't have many of those. There's usually a couple of cases where you're trying to build things, particularly around things like um, knowledge estate, business performance,
Mm-hmm.
or sort of performance and analytics, where actually you tend to have the greatest amount of, or greatest complexity of data sources, and actually where there is potentially some value in creating, and you need more of a system approach, because you're not just changing an element of a process. Back to your point about sort of more of an end-to-end workflow, there's a whole workflow that this needs to fit into, and potentially, to your point, a whole workflow that this could reimagine. One of the things that we were looking at as we were looking at business performance, because that's, in many sort of corporate insights roles, that takes up a huge amount of people's time, is how do you completely reimagine that whole process with an agentic AI approach, as opposed to thinking about, I'm gonna, potentially you just try and think about how I can use AI in this bit of it, but actually maybe you rethink the whole end-to-end workflow as well. So actually either fully agent run, or more of a, agent partner who's
Yep,
partnering through you through the entire workflow. Now that to me, you probably need to think, you may still need a partner to help you with that, but you need to think about that as a big sort of organizational systemic change, as opposed to little pilot that you might still run a little pilot over here to understand a part of it, but you're going to need to think about that as a much bigger sort of business organizational change.
for sure. Nick, I know one of your kind of key passions is around kind of behavioral science and storytelling. What have you seen in terms of kind of the role of AI, and kind of blending human empathy and behavioral science, and how kind of AI can complement behavioral science to kind of create more effective change?
Yeah, I think some of the most exciting things that I've seen have been some of the great work that people are doing to train AI agents on, or LLMs on being behavioral scientists, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
one of the one of the great pieces I saw recently was somebody building essentially a network of agents with qualitative researchers and trained LLM like agent behavioral scientists and semioticians, but really building a network so that the dream we always had is that you can actually be able to efficiently tap into, at least at a first point, a real network of experts and specialists that can help you think beyond just the research, but think, holistically about how to solve this problem from multiple angles. So to me, there's something really exciting in the sort of specialism and the specialist expertise, and that the access to that some of the AI solutions are starting to bring to bear. And so again, to me, this is what I get really excited about with AI, is when it's not just about efficiency, because
Yep.
I feel like it often gets reduced to,
Yep.
it's quicker, it's cheaper, when
Yeah.
actually, I think what I get more excited about is, sure, and that it helps you spot things that you can't spot. It helps you get access or bring in insight, knowledge, expertise that you wouldn't be easily be able to do without AI. That it helps you simulate and predict things that, again, you might not be able to see might not be able to see otherwise. So that to me is why it gets really excited. So that's kind of one part of it, which is I think where AI can actually integrate some of that expertise. What I've seen it start to do is sort of quite early days. I think in some of, at least what I've seen, is being able to bring that sort of expertise in has meant that it's challenged teams to think differently about about what they're dealing with, and actually
Yep.
think about it more as, you know, bring in that sort of behavioral science thinking to help them think through, actually, if I want to drive the change in consumer behavior, I need to think about like what's gonna make this a repeat behavior? How am I actually going to drive that? What's the reward system that I'm going to put in place? And so I think it's helping in a very accessible way to start to bring in some of the stuff that's been around us all as researchers all this time, but we haven't been able to sort of find a way to fully integrate it into the way that we operate. So that's one really exciting thing. On the other hand, I think, you know, back to what we talked about before, is the other part of this for me is that the technology, as brilliant as the technology is, and whatever the technology is only part of the solution. So the other part of this is how the human scientist and the behavioral scientist can also play a role to add their expertise and add their, again, whether you're changing an organization, you're changing consumer shopper behavior, how we bring that to bear as well as along with the technology. It's the classic case of the sort of the human intelligence along with the artificial intelligence. By bringing
Mhm.
those together, you can actually get the power of both of those. So a lot of the, yeah, including yourselves as well, a lot of the great work that I'm seeing, particularly that are driving incredible uh, quality and effectiveness out of this, is they're using the human and the technology together. The technology is taking a huge amount of the heavy lifting to do the first iterations of something, but it's actually the human that's coming in to layer on top of that to say, well, this is what this means. This is, you know, my expertise on how we're going to land this into action. So I think it's actually about bringing those two together that I think will be the key, potentially at least in the short term, to really unlocking the power of what AI and what the technology can bring.
No, I couldn't agree more on on that point. The combination of the human expert strategists as well as these powerful models and the access to data and automation is the real breakthrough. So switching gears a little bit,
Mm,
obviously you've held insights leadership roles for a long time. You're working with now teams and insights leaders across the industry. Um, and I'm sure they're coming to you for advice and support on kind of the changing role of the insights leader and how that's kind of evolving. How in terms of kind of that leadership level, um, how are you seeing that evolve given the changes we're seeing in the industry? We've talked a bit about the bell curve and removing a lot of the work, but
yeah,
from a pure leadership level, what's the impact there?
yeah, I think it's a great question. I think what I'm seeing is, I think particularly at the leadership level, a recognition that AI will dramatically change the way that we work as an insights industry. I mean, not just on the client side, but on the agency side, all of us, right? I mean, it's change work fundamentally. But I think many insights leaders are starting to recognize that. And I think it's starting to bring a lot of questions then about a couple of things. One is, then what, in a world where a lot of, let's say, 70%, 60% maybe of what we actually spend our day, or our teams spend their time doing day to day. Let's imagine that 67% or 70% of that is in somewhat automated or augmented by artificial intelligence, or delegated to artificial intelligence or augmented by it. Then there's a real question of, then, first of all, what is our role and how do we spend our time? And I think
Yep.
you'll see a big shift then to what we talked about before, which is, actually, I need to make sure that I'm training then my teams on how to be really good at the beginning and end of that bell curve, as opposed to focusing on the middle part, because let's
Yep.
assume that the AI can handle 90% of basically what's in the middle, but then there's all this time at the beginning and the end, and it's a different set of skills, right? It's a different set of skills about challenging the business, interpreting what the brief means, thinking and being a fantastic storyteller, influencer, landing it into business decision making. Those are different skill sets in some
Sure.
cases from what we've trained our teams to do until now. And, you know, so that's kind of one vector. I think the other vector is recognizing that that shift is also going to mean that we're going to have to think about how do we equip our teams to be able to be good partners with AI, right? So again, not just blindly delegating, but actually understanding how to train, understanding how to prompt, understanding how to interpret and use what AI is giving them. So, and I think increasingly, what we'll discover is we may need two very different skill sets within our
Hmm.
teams. We'll need more of a business influencer, for want of a better word, and more of a sort of technical expert
Yep.
who's rather than the sort of technical expert of today who might be focused on the doing of the research analytics, almost essentially a manager of agents, of AI agents, who's actually spending their time understanding how to train them, understanding how to prompt them, but it's and bringing maybe best in class expertise on how to do research and analytics to that ecosystem, but they're really becoming the expert at how to get the best out of the AI tools and capabilities that we're building in order to be able to service the business. I just don't think it's possible anymore as we think about the future of our function that we're going to be able to have sort of, you know, the great T-shaped generalists who can do all of that or understand all of that. In reality, I think we're going to
Mm,
need people who can be great business influencers and people who can be amazing sort of technical experts, and they're going to have to work together more than ever to
for sure.
help actually ultimately deliver what the business needs. So essentially, I think the sort of shape, and not only will the work change, but I think the sort of shape of the function is going to change because we're going to need people who are even more sort of technical experts in one respect and people who are even more sort of business influencers in the other.
Absolutely. Um, I'm curious how you would advise people. Obviously, there's so much changing, so many shiny objects, lots of different resources to kind of learn from. It can be
Hmm.
definitely overwhelming at times. Even for someone like myself, I'm sure you're kind of deeply embedded, as you said, kind of you spend all your time talking about this, focused on it right now. Are there any resources you've come across, podcasts, books, content? How are you kind of quietening the noise and understanding what's really gonna it's just yeah, there's such as you say, the hype cycle is real. There's a lot of shiny
Yeah.
objects. You can be pulled in so many different directions. What have you done to kind of really kind of focus in your learning and knowledge acquisition as a mix of kind of the theoretical as well as that practical
Yeah.
and hands-on with stuff?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's a couple of answers to that. One is stay curious without as you said like without getting overwhelmed by it because it's very easy to feel totally overwhelmed by it. So I've done some foundational basic courses just understanding, you know, the basics of what we're talking about. I'm not a by any means an AI expert as in terms of the technology part, but I've just started to equip myself so I'm not overwhelmed by the terminology, and at least I'm like,
Yep.
okay, I understand the high level mechanics of this. I understand some of the terminology. So I think educating yourself, and there are a couple of different courses I can recommend to people, but there's some useful basic courses on the fundamentals.
Yep.
And then I say, so that's step one. I say step two is I say being curious about what's out there and starting essentially to think about back to what we talked about before is as you start to see some of that stuff, starting to structure it in your mind of like, how could this help me based on what problems I have in the business? It all kind of, I mean, I know it sounds really boring, but it all essentially comes back to as a team, as a leader, as an insights professional, like knowing what problems you need to solve for in your team, knowing like how you're spending your time today, how you want to spend it in future. I mean, those are good disciplines for all of us, regardless of whether we're talking about AI or not. But I think it's a great kind of start point to say, okay, so if this is the problem solving, when you start to see things go, could this be a solve for this particular problem that I had? So, you know, again, start with the business problem in mind. Don't get overwhelmed by the technology, but as you see things, start to think about could this be a solution for XYZ? And then I think across a lot of what I'm seeing is Don't think I need to swallow the elephant all in one go, right? Back to our
Yeah.
point about there'll be a couple of huge transformational projects potentially that you need to undertake, but a lot of it, I would say, start with pilot it, prove it, and then
Yep.
think about whether you can scale it. So again, if it fits a business problem, and if you think there's long-term value in it because it solves a business problem, and you think that it is feasible to potentially scale, doesn't mean you can, but it's feasible to potentially scale, and you understand what might be involved. Again, you don't need to know everything, but you just need to know enough to go, this is at least worth, because what you don't want to do is pilot something and it's never really going to go anywhere because you never can
Hmm.
scale it. So just
Yep.
starting to understand, like, is it theoretically feasible? And then pilot it, try it out, prove that that it has impact, and then you can start to work out how to scale those things. But again, don't try and bite off too many things at once.
Great advice. Nick, this has been fantastic as expected. Just nugget after nugget of great insight and kind of thought provoking stuff for people to be thinking about. As we kind of wrap this up, I would love to just get your perspective on how you see the relationship between brands, agencies, technology players in the space kind of evolving over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it will be a journey, I think, for all of us, honestly, because I think we're all still trying to work out what I think we have an idea of what the future might look like, but how we
Hmm.
all play our roles in that could
Yeah.
look quite different from how it looks today. So I will say it'll look different. I'm not quite sure, honestly, what it's going to look like in reality. I think back to our conversation towards the beginning, I think there'll be some things that agencies might do today, whether creative agencies, strategy agencies, research agencies, that clients may say, look, I need to do that in-house because I need to control this data, protect this data, connect this data, whatever it might be. But equally, there's going to be plenty of new capabilities that are opened up through this, which maybe that work was done, things like opportunity platform development, some of that work was done in-house. Increasingly, with the right AI solution, that's something I could delegate to a trusted partner to help me generate that. So I think the sort of line between agencies, client-side partners is probably going to be a little blurrier than maybe it is today. And we might end up in
Agree.
many cases with solutions that are sort of co-built, sort of in-house, sort of out of
Yeah.
house, teams that maybe are external to the client, but actually sort of work almost full-time on the client. So it'll be a lot more blurry and a lot more hybrid, I think, in future. I think it'll just have to be just the amount of technological and sort of process change that's going to be happening. I think it'll be a lot more blended probably than it is today.
Yeah, I agree. I think the role of agents doing work across a company or working hand in hand with internal teams and seeing those kind of almost be fractional team members that maybe
Yeah,
fulfill a specific role within a business or as a specific partner and can be a kind of always available thought partner on stuff is really fascinating. Nick, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you spending some time to share your thoughts. Excited to hear about your new venture and adventures in Portugal. So wish
thanks.
you all the best and hope to have you as a guest on the show again soon and see where things are maybe in 12 months time, because I'm sure no doubt a lot will have changed when we next speak.
I'm sure it'll all change and I'll take back everything I just said, but thanks,
Absolutely.
Dave. It's
Well,
great to see you
yeah.
again.
Yeah, thanks again, Nick. If you've enjoyed today's show, be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on AI Role Models.
Thanks for tuning in to AI Role Models. Follow now wherever you get your podcasts to be notified of new episodes. Connect with One Strategy on LinkedIn to join us for live recordings. Don't forget to leave a review, and we can't wait to see you again soon for our next episode.